Okay, let's jump in. So just a reminder, the captions are available in multiple languages. Every session you attend during build, you'll have a chance to win some Mapbox swag. So sign up to as many as you can and discover the past build sessions on Zoom in the event lobby. You can check those out. I think everything will also be on YouTube later on. So today we have a wonderful keynote for you today on Developer Day. So we're going to kind of look both directions. So first, we're going to start with a look back at 14 years of spatial innovation since Mapbox's founding back in 2010. So we have three brilliant engineers with us, and then we'll switch over to the road ahead and kind of look at what's coming, all from a technology and product perspective from three influential Mapboxers: technical advisor, product manager, and engineer. So before we jump in with the first part with Ian, Konstantin, and Vlad, I'll do a quick presentation on some of the key technologies and kind of a timeline. All right, so let's take a quick peek. So we look back to the founding of Mapbox back in 2010. We can see some pretty important key events here and some technologies that we innovated on. MB tiles, tile mill, the vector tile spec, Mapbox tiling service, so making a full product out of importing and setting up tiles in the cloud. We've had a conference, we've had various rounds of funding, innovated on the globe view and Mapbox standards, kind of new ways to visualize and build maps. A few selected technologies. So MB tiles format. This was a way for us to store full tile sets into a single file, make them portable. This helped innovate with maps on a stick and kind of moving tile sets around. So maps on a stick, I think some of our engineers can tell a little bit more about this because it kind of is before my time, but the idea is that we can make sort of portable maps that fit on a thumb drive and move them around quickly. UTF grid, this one's near and dear to me because we used it a lot at a company I used to work at, but this is how we used to figure out where your cursor was when you were interacting with a map that was actually made of images. So it was kind of an invisible layer that kind of covered the tile and would help us understand which one of the vector geometries you were mousing over at the time. Of course, TileMill, which is our earliest map design studio, allowed you to use Carto CSS, if anyone remembers that. It's kind of a CSS-like language to help select different parts of the geometry and style them. So this was wildly popular and was a big innovation over doing it by hand with code. Now we had a nice graphical interface for editing modern digital maps, modern at the time. Mapbox vector tile spec, of course. So here we have a picture of the awesome vector tiles list. So widely adopted standard, innovated here at Mapbox. And I think if we look here, yeah, you'll see in the original authors of the spec, one of them is Konstantin Kafer, who's going to be on this panel in just a moment here. So MVTs have made lots and lots of beautiful digital maps possible. Of course, GL rendering kind of changed the game when it came to digital mapping. So we see some smooth transitions and animations, all the rendering happening in the browser instead of having to request raster tiles. I think, yeah, GLJS, once GLJS came out, we started to see much more dynamic and interesting and rapidly changing maps, animations, things of that nature. And then, of course, the globe projection, which came out just a couple years ago, but also, solved this kind of age-old problem of, rendering the full globe, full planet Earth in a rectangle. And now we can actually have, globe when we zoom out and then Mercator when we zoom in. So that'll bring us to the panel. So let's bring out Ian, Konstantin, and Vladimir, and we'll get started. All right.
Good morning and good evening.
Good morning and good evening. Do we have everybody out here? I don't see Ian.
Hey.
Oh, you're there. Okay, maybe it's just my view. Okay, so Ian joined the company in 2009. Actually, I think that's before it was founded, so it doesn't mean you joined the company, but you can tell us a bit about that. 2011 for Konstantin, and then 2013 for Vlad. So all of you have been here for over a decade, working on various parts of our technology stack. So I want to start with the very first question. How would you describe the state of the digital mapping world when Mapbox first started working in this space? And I guess that can be not necessarily when Mapbox first started, but when you first started also, when you first started at Mapbox, what were the biggest pain points back then? So we're talking 2010, 2011 era.
So who should go first?
Go ahead, Vlad.
So 2010, 11 is around the time when Leaflet was released. Um, and yeah, all the maps were raster tiles based. Um, and back then, interactive maps were about having like a static base map and just a few pins, maybe lines on top. So they're very limited in what you could do with it. And performance was a big problem. If you try to add like several dozen pins on the map, it could start being slow. And of course, it's hard to imagine how much we've how long of a way we've come since then. Um, yeah, I don't know, maybe Konstantin, you can add.
Ian Constantine, reflections on what the digital mapping landscape was like back then?
Yeah. Back in 2011, when Mapbox started, it was still pretty difficult to make a map. And this is like the whole reason why Mapbox started in the first place. And back then you had to go and source your data. For example, you could take data from OpenStreetMap. You had to extract all of the data yourself, process it, which required massive amounts of resources. And then you have the data in a MySQL database or a Postgres database. And then you have to set up a server that goes and fetches the data from the server to paint the map, essentially. And because it was so expensive and so complicated to set up, people were using these ready-made base map tiles. It's Mapbox provided one as well. But like Vlad said, the problem with that was that it's still pretty hard to like create your own base map, create your own design that does what you want. For example, you wanted like a subdued map that allows you to highlight your own data that you put onto the map. Whereas with a traditional street map, you'd have a lot more things that are shown on a map that you don't necessarily want. And so I think the opportunity that Mapbox saw was that there's a lot of room for customizing the map.
Yeah, that point about the browser getting slow, Vlad, that you mentioned, and you try to show a few hundred points and then maybe get to 1,000 and then the browser crashes. And yeah, we were like back when I was working at Development Seed and we were working on this problem of mapping, and Mapbox started kind of around then. And some of the customers that we were working with were these projects they had in like the international development community, like the World Bank, National Democratic Institute. They're trying to map a lot of data to tell their story. And so there's this real problem of, well, and they wanted to make it accessible on the web, which was, one of the best and most widely used platforms and way to get out their message and share the story. But yeah, we just hit this point where you're very limited by how much data you could actually show. And like Konstantin is saying, the whole process to then make the base map was very cumbersome. We even remember at a certain point we had started building like custom servers that customers could like use on-prem to like cut these raster tiles that had hardware that would do it faster, but it still wasn't fast enough. And yeah, it's just, and then I think Chris, you mentioned this, the MB tiles, and that was kind of born out of something that made it a bit easier, because like at Zoom level 15, you're talking about over 1 billion raster tiles. So you're trying to put that, or move that around from like, okay, rendered it, now you have to like put it on a USB drive. Just copying those files could take a very long time. Whereas the MB tiles kind of packed it down into one SQL database, essentially, which was much smaller in terms of disk space usage, and just one file.
Yeah, I think when we spoke a little earlier on this, I think the word democratization came up, and I'd love to accentuate that, because I remember, my earliest tinkerings with Leaflet, the base maps were always something somebody else did, right? It was you can add your vectors on top, you can add some markers, you can color them, but like really the whole look and feel of the map was dependent on somebody else's raster tile set. And I remember spending not really knowing where they came from, but knowing that somebody else published these things. And probably took a whole lot of resources and time, as we know. So Mapbox really made that something that the rest of us could start thinking about. Okay, I want to move on to the next question. So what stands out to you as the single most important technological step or breakthrough in the development of Mapbox so far? So I listed a few of them, but what in your opinion is the biggest one that kind of changed the game?
I think for me personally, it's definitely vector tiles. I think vector tiles definitely like completely changed the landscape, and we see that in its popularity today, where it's essentially becoming like an industry standard. And to highlight what an important role the vector tiles specification played is that before that, like I said, you had to set up your Postgres server and you have to continually run it. But with vector tiles, you could essentially package the data into these small, what are essentially mini databases, and just ship them anywhere. It's just like a flat file, and you have like a fairly simple reader that can access those vector tiles that can be ported to lots of different platforms and environments. And I think this innovation was initially born out of our desire to not run Postgres databases in the cloud, because it was just way too expensive for us back then, but to use S3 essentially back then. So we stored all of the data on S3, so we didn't have to run this infrastructure to actually compute and select and query the data. We would just retrieve the essentially pre-made database query that we put into this vector tile. And back then, we built this for rendering with Mapnik. So we still rendered static PNG images essentially on the server and then served them as raster images to the client. But as a side effect, this also enabled the development of Mapbox GL, the map render that you know and probably use, or hopefully use today. And just the fact that we could actually access the vector data and transfer the vector data very efficiently from the server to the client made that even possible, so that we could even think about creating something like Mapbox GL.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely vector rendering. And I remember that time when I first came to Washington, D.C. to meet the Mapbox team. And when I just joined, I thought I would be working at Mapbox maintaining Leaflet, which I created earlier. But turns out that there's this R&D project, which Konstantin is working on, like rendering data on the client. And this was absolutely mind-blowing to me, because I didn't really thought that it would be possible. And back then, like the browser landscape was completely different. Internet Explorer, WebGL was not universally supported. GPUs were not as developed on both mobile phones and desktop. And there were lots of issues and lots of bugs and lots of challenges. So at first I was very surprised. When I was walking with Konstantin in DC, I'm like asking, "Hey, what are you working on?" "Oh, well, vector rendering." Like, but why? And Konstantin because now it seems actually possible. or something in that sense. So started digging deeper into it, and it's yeah, it turned out that it was, and it's completely changed the way changed what could be possible on the client. Like instead of having those static images that were generated, like it took a long time to generate, you could like change the appearance of the map completely on the fly and render any kinds of data on the fly and render lots of data, like thousands and hundreds of thousands of features, and all that in real time. So that was kind of mind blowing. It was very challenging over the next few years while we like shaped it, but yeah, that was transformative for the industry as a whole.
Sorry, before you go, Ian, I don't know if you want to answer that, but before you go, I'll just relate this kind of story to everyone. If you recall, hitting that zoom button on Leaflet or Google Maps and waiting for raster tiles to load and kind of seeing these big chunks. I think it helped people understand what tiles were, but it also was just a bad experience because you're just kind of waiting for these things to visualize. And then I remember very early on also saying, man, I wish I could zoom to zoom level 7.5, but I can't. And now I can because of GL rendering. Ian, did you have a thought on that question?
Yeah, I was going to say vector tiles and vector rendering as well.
Okay, it was a loaded question.
And I think, like I didn't work very much, if at all, on on the client side and rendering and all that. I was mostly working on the server side in it, but it did have some impacts in terms of our serving and performance. Like the cost to, like Konstantin was saying, we put a lot of tiles on S3. The cost to like put tiles is very expensive. And you could basically, the number of tiles was less than like a full tile set. Then like Chris, like you were saying, like zooming as well, like in this idea of like over zooming, if I'm understanding correctly, remembering correctly, basically the tiles were bigger and you can zoom in and out and you're not necessarily loading more tiles. It's just kind of changing the zoom with that same tile. So there's like client side benefits in that regard to it, and also like the server side benefits, fewer tiles, and getting those tiles over to the client. But then also, yeah, like the styling, the stability to like then everyone can have essentially a base map and they can style it in any way without having to like then run the billions of tiles through the whole rendering process again. On the server side, it's just a huge change. Yeah.
Excellent. So we're running up on time, but I'm going to ask the final question. I don't think we can get responses from all three, unfortunately. So whoever is feeling most excited about answering this one, you're writing your memoir. And what is one anecdote from the early days of Mapbox that you would know you have to include? Something you can talk about with the group here. But what's something you recall fondly from the early days that you would want to make sure gets written down? Whoever goes first.
One thing that comes to mind is just launching some of our biggest customers, and we've had like different scale points along the way, but back in 2012 we were launching a pretty big customer back then, Foursquare, and in the end launched it successfully, but it wasn't easy. And I remember working, for example, with you, Konstantin, on how to better like do load testing ahead of major changes to our infrastructure and so on. I remember not seeing the light of day for like 3 days to get through that launch. And just then the aftermath of the kinds of things that we learn after certain scale points, how we then think about how can we do our infrastructure differently, or how can we improve things on the client to get better performance based on just what we're now seeing and dealing with at the different scale. But I think those are very tough moments, but also it was very fun just working together with everyone back then and still today to get through those things. Very exciting, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for that reflection. So we'll wrap up this part on looking back. So I want to thank Konstantin, Vlad, and Ian for their perspectives here. And thank you for sharing, all the great work that you've been doing over the years. Yeah, with that, we'll say goodbye and we'll bring out our next three panelists. So thanks, guys. Okay, while we wait for Angela, Matthew, and Topi to come out, we're going to take a look forward. All right, welcome all three. So first thing, I'll just jump right into the questions. You can maybe, once you start answering, maybe introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about what part of the company you're working on, et cetera. But let's start with the very first question. Looking forward, tell us one thing that you're most excited about for the near future development of Mapbox technology or mapping and location tech in general. So this can be from what you're working on or what other parts of the company are working on, but what are you most excited about?
I can start if that's okay, Chris.
Of course.
I
Thanks.
am Angela. I've been working with Mapbox since 2018. Not as long as the previous panel, but still been a real long time. I've worked on all sorts of things from telemetry, navigation. Right now, I am working sort of across the entire organization as a technical advisor. A thing that I'm most excited about, it's hard to pick one thing only, to be honest, but I would say I'm super excited about what we've seen in terms of autonomous driving and autonomous vehicles, and mapping is a pretty big part of that. The reason that's exciting to me is I actually think autonomous vehicles are making the roads safer for cyclists, pedestrians, and actually also drivers themselves. I'm a big bicyclist, so really appreciate the safer roads. And of course, with that comes access to super rich real-time mapping information. And that unlocks a whole bunch of really interesting applications in mapping. So I'm excited. The other day I was thinking that we've come such a long way from, paper maps sitting in the back of your car when you're moving around. It's technology that's moving super fast. So super exciting.
Awesome. Topi, Matthew?
Yeah, maybe I can go next. So I've been here 2-3 years, I guess. I work as an engineering manager at the basemap team. So we work essentially with the data you see on the map. And my excitement is, I've always been a data head, and my excitement on what's coming next or what's happening is related to data. I think the things we're doing with, let's say, the custom landmarks that we're building, HD roads that we're building, I think we're really moving into during the vector tile era, if you can call it that. As all of you know, roads have traditionally been line strings, and all of a sudden they are not. There are minor changes in the underlying data that will grow into something much bigger. I think there is a transformation phase currently with the core data that you see on the maps, and that's what gets me currently excited.
I think that's the common thread between what both you and Angela just said is that the map is not necessarily just something we look at anymore. It's something we it is more of a literal replication of the real world that becomes useful for actually moving through it and things like that. That's my take on it anyway. And
absolutely. And when we heard from the previous panel how they were first solving issues with, let's say, election maps or very different scale, I think the data things and all of the problems that we're now solving are on a very, very high zoom level issues, if you can think of the zoom level analogy. So I think that's exciting.
Sure. Excellent. Matthew?
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Matthew. I lead product for Studio and our developer tools. I've been at Mapbox about 3.5 years now, and it's been really exciting to see how the platform has grown since that time, and also how internally we've moved away from silos and just thinking more holistically as a platform. I think related to Topi, one specific thing I'm excited about are just all the investments we're making into how our users work with custom data. We have a session coming up on custom data pipelines, and I think we have a ton of specifically cool MTS features like clustering, incremental updates, new tools to create tile sets and live edit recipes. But I think those are all just scratching the surface and just reimagining and just simplifying the way you work with data. If you've worked with custom data, you know it can be pretty convoluted and you have to sort of, you know, daisy chain a bunch of different tools to make it work. So I'm excited for us to solve this problem and simplify it.
Excellent. Yes. And historically, you've been able to bring your own data into making the maps and add it to the base map or overlay it. But now we're starting to get into you bring your own search data, bring your own navigation data, do route avoidance, do geofencing and that sort of thing. So you're right. I think it's a brand new world of people being able to customize beyond just the map renderer. Okay, so for our next question, from your position, how do you expect the developer experience to change as Mapbox continues to develop its products? So what are you most looking forward to, how people actually make use of these things? We have documentation, we have Mapbox Studio, we have developer tools to help kind of put all these different pieces together. What do you think is coming for the developer experience?
I would say the first thing I would say is I don't expect that Mapbox will ever stop investing a ton in the developer experience. We've always been a developer-focused company, and I think that's going to continue in the case. So maybe that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think Matthew will be able to share more here, but we are definitely investing in some pretty interesting things as far as our developer tooling is concerned, and I think that maybe later this year, next year, is going to be super interesting. And also initiatives like our UX framework, I think that's going to be available later this year. It's going to make building rich navigation applications probably simpler than ever. So, I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on and a lot of investment and a lot of focus on our developers for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna plus one to that. I think Studio is a good proof point of a strong developer tool, and our number one user of Studio are actually developers. And I think we know that people want more of the map configuration experience to happen in one place as much as possible. And I think it can feel disjointed. I think outside of styling, there's also our portfolio is just so big and we have so many cool services and products. And as an end developer, it's hard to sort of stitch across them and sort of interact with those APIs. So I'm excited to see that we're sort of taking a step back, holistically thinking about the right tools that'll help, new developers evaluate our platform, existing developers interact with our APIs and SDKs. I think another thing I'll touch on is I like that we're also, balancing customizability and also being very opinionated. Like you don't have to, like you have all the building blocks, but we can also give you some like healthy, strong defaults to get you started. So I think directionally that feels like a good place we're heading towards.
Excellent. Topi, do you have a thought about the developer experience?
Matthew almost said it what I was thinking to say. To go in more detail, I'm thinking I was heavily involved in developing Mapbox standard, the so-called, we call it default style that you now get with the newest Maps SDKs. And there you can almost think it as a paradigm shift, what we offer with Mapbox standard, when the interactions with the map are much more well thought out on how you interact and how you customize the map with it, like Matthew said. And the main idea is to help developers when they update their SDKs and develop their own applications on top of the map, to make sure that they always get the latest and greatest features without much hassle. So I think so just the map styling and Mapbox standard is something that's like a big shift that's still ongoing, and we will learn how much we will get from that, like bit by bit.
All right, excellent. So next question I have for the panel is, you're surveying the landscape of mapping and location tech today, so not just at Mapbox, but the industry in general. well, what stands out? What are the shining peaks? What are the connective rivers? And what are the mysterious canyons? So I guess the metaphor there is just kind of what are we running on and sprinting on? What are the kind of things that are still missing? So what's your perspective on the overall mapping and location landscape today?
Say shining peaks probably. Maybe I'll similar to what Topi was saying earlier, but I would say this availability of data for super high definition maps, not just for visualization. We see a lot of like 3D and AR and things like that, but also for search and navigation. I do really think that we have access to detailed location information in a way that we probably have never before. So sort of like the peak that keeps on growing. Connecting rivers, I don't know. I would say that I don't know if rivers are water and water keep things moving. I would say that Mapbox and mapping technology is probably a connecting river because they are what make the technology available to everyone. I mean, really thanks to developers. And canyons, that's hard. I did try to think about this, Chris. I would say I'm not sure if something missing, but something that I think we need to be careful with is always data privacy and data quality, because we have shared huge amount of data available, but privacy is always a concern. If you've talked to me ever before, I think about privacy a ton, and like a lot of data doesn't mean that the data is high quality, and we've seen that it's very easy to sort of like lie with data. So I would say we need to be very careful and navigate the data quality and data privacy pretty seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I can try and touch on some of these things. I think shining peaks, to Angela's point, we have such rich data and we have so many sort of like sensors around the world, and it's going to be so much more important to keep our maps up to date. And I think one thing I'm really excited about is how we're reducing sort of the turnaround time to ensuring that maps are high quality. So I think it can go from weeks to days to hours in terms of how we, automate the data we come in about what needs to be improved and publish that into maps that people are using. So I'm excited about maps being as fresh as possible. I think more sort of philosophically, maps are becoming more and more central to everyday people's experiences. I think, I live in California, like wildfires are such a big part of being in California. And I think with climate change, there's just so many things that are making more people sort of become more fluent in how to interact with maps. And that's exciting because for me coming into Mapbox, I was not really a map nerd, and now I really appreciate and feel excited about like what a map can tell me. I think for canyons, this one's a hard one to think about, but one thing that always comes to mind is I feel like this is kind of a hot take, but I feel like we've normalized certain bad experiences on maps. Like a lot of maps can feel very visually cluttered. Like if I'm looking at a real estate map, everyone has just accepted that you're going to see like a million pins on a map, and you have to sort of visually, it's on the end user to sort of parse through that and make decisions. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity to start to be opinionated about how we, present a lot of information, but also help someone quickly digest and make decisions from them.
Awesome. That reminds me of a quote from, I believe, I think I read this on Atomic Right blog, but, good mapping is choosing what not to show. But anyway, take that one, put it in your pocket. Topi, did you have a response to that question?
Yeah, it's like Scandinavian design. So the less you have, the simplicity is a good thing. I don't have like individual things for shining peaks or valleys, but what I see happening currently is again, I'm thinking from a data perspective. I see how there are like if we think about the scale of the map again and data, I see some areas on not on only on our maps or OpenStreetMap or other other vendors. I'm seeing some areas of the map, some geographies like having very high quality data, and some areas having more stable development. So I think it's rather than, let's say, the traditional OSM way of like having a bit of everything everywhere, I see an interesting development of it's partly due to the sensor data that we were talking about, like that data gets only collected in certain places. And I think that's an interesting development on how maps and data evolves in different parts of the world and different geos on different scales. And also this kind of interesting development in the whole map experience, like both Angela and Matthew touched on it, but I feel like the way we still do maps and visualize things are very much tied to the raster map era. So I think there is so much room for innovation that we could still do in the way what we show on the map and how we show things on the map. So we are geography or cartography is where like many of us are coming from, as like the domain where many of us are coming from, and that's a very traditional science, if you call it that. And it's I think I see a lot of room for innovation and big changes still in how we visualize, how we treat, and how we analyze data. So a very vague answer. I'm sorry for that, but trying to say that it's like I'm excited about what there still is to come.
Okay, excellent. So we'll come back to you in a couple of years and see if any of those things have actually happened. Okay, so last question for this panel. This one should be fairly simple to answer because it just depends on how you approach your normal day-to-day work here. But what is your North Star as you build the mapping and location technologies of the future? So all of you are working in kind of different parts of the platform or looking at it either at a local level or kind of a more holistic level at what we do at Mapbox. What's your guiding principles, North Star, what keeps you focused on building, on how to build these great products?
I'll say for me, data privacy, data accuracy, data freshness, availability for making location applications is sort of strive for.
Yeah, I think for me, this one's easy. It's just talking to developers. One of our values is customer focus, and just letting developers lead the way and help us define our vision and strategy. I think every week at Mapbox, someone at the company is talking to at least one or two customers. And that keeps me excited that we are sort of empathizing with that developer experience.
Topi?
For me, it's about building a world-class user experience through a stunning visual experience. So having the best looking maps that will blow you away. That's my North Star.
Awesome. And on that note, I'll just share, the personal anecdote. The very first time I saw Mapbox GLJS, I think I said this a little bit earlier, but you're right, did blow your hair back. And then everyone you show it to blows your hair back. When I worked in city government and we introduced these maps and they'd been used to looking at, looking at the older style of web maps, it blows people's hair back. And I think that continues up to this day. I think you zoom in on those 3D buildings, you see these kind of pseudo realistic landscapes around our key areas and cities and our 3D buildings. I think it still blows people's hair away. So blows people's hair back, not away. Okay, that'll wrap up our session looking forward. So thank you all to our panelists. And for those of you who are attending, catch the rest of the development sessions today. I'll be doing one on docs and dev tools in a moment here. We have one on mobile development, one on web development, one on data pipelines, etc. So go ahead and jump into the rest of these sessions, and hope you're getting some good feedback out of these sessions on how you build with Mapbox. Thanks so much.